We can't compete with the CBC 1.5 billion taxpayers' dollars that go into bells and whistles, but you know what? It doesn't actually cost any money to tell the truth, which is what we do here. And joining us now via Skype is our friend Ben Weingarten. Ben, how you doing tonight?
Ezra, I'm well. How about you?
I am great. My head is pessimistic. My heart is optimistic. My head is full of polls and images of voter fraud I see in Pennsylvania and the drumbeat of gaslighting. Oh, Trump has no chance. Everyone hates him. He's a racist. My head is pessimistic. My heart says, come on, come on. I think he can do it. Look at that. Look at those crowds in the rallies. I am on a knife's edge, Ben. I don't know how it's going to go. How are you feeling about tonight?
Based upon some of the rhetoric that we've heard out of the Biden campaign, I think there's a real tell there in terms of his campaign manager saying, well, you know, we could lose Florida, we could lose Pennsylvania, we still have paths to 270. If I was the candidate, that's not what I would want to hear my campaign manager messaging early in the day on election day. But I really do think what this comes down to is if you're the president, it's not just about retaining the states that you had last time and fighting in some of those states where he won by a fraction, by a very small margin. You have to beat the litigation and the fraud margin that exists this election.
The margin of error, you're so right. And it makes me nervous. Justin, do we have a clip of that Pennsylvania voting station that devolved into chaos? And what scares me is that Trump has these massive rallies. For example, in Butler, Pennsylvania, I heard reports there were over 50,000 people at that rally. That's an impressive number. But, you know, you have 50 Democrat Party workers, Antifa Party workers, BLM Party workers counting the votes in Philly, and it can neutralize them. Here, take a quick look at this video.
You're not letting me in? Well, no. It's not taking. Call the police. Do it. If you legal, call
the city guy is usually there. He'll be there.
Okay.
Call that number. Tell him to call somebody.
I have a citywide watcher certificate.
And it's not for this location.
It's not for it. Is not. Is this the city of Philadelphia? This is the city of Philadelphia. This is the city of Philadelphia. This is the city of Philadelphia. You wanted to talk. You wanted to talk outside. Let's talk. I have a water. I asked you to read the line. The line said it's good in every ward and division in the city.
The man outside was a Republican scrutineer, is the word we use here in Canada. I think there's a slightly different term in Pennsylvania. He was certified, authorized for the entire city, but you saw the Democrat poll keeper, observer, watchers keeping him out. Who knows what was going on in there that they didn't want him to see? You can have 50,000 Republicans voting in the Butler area, Ben, but if you have 50,000 frauds going on in that building there, you know, that'll neutralize them. That's what worries me.
Yeah, it appears the only way I would describe it is sort of intimidation or rule breaking when it comes to poll watchers. And I've seen other video footage of this as well out today and some anecdotal evidence from folks on the ground in Pennsylvania as well. And it just so happens that you seem to have problems at precincts that just happen to be the Republican predominating in the Republican predominant areas in many states, including Georgia as well. So, you know, it's overcoming all of these different forces at once. And the turnout has to be that strong, and there have to be enough Democrats that cross over. All that we see at the macro level is data showing that Republican turnout is outpacing where it was last year, for example, in Florida, that Democrats sort of cannibalized their vote in the early voting. And so the real question is going to become, is the turnout of Republican voters and then crossovers and independents today enough to beat that pace that Democrats were on that's really fallen off today? And again, to this point about the litigation and fraud margin, I think if you're a Republican, you want to be in a place where as this night progresses, Pennsylvania is not the state that this all hinges on. If it comes down to that one state in a contest of litigation and fraud, I put my money on Democrats, generally speaking. It doesn't mean Republicans won't fight like hell. Doesn't mean they can't win. But I think, first of all, it tells you something about who the Democrats are, that litigation and fraud is where they would dominate. But it's a situation that you don't want to be in. And so what I'm looking for in kind of the early going tonight is, how will the president do in Georgia and North Carolina? If he's doing pretty well in Georgia and North Carolina, I think he'll probably take Arizona too. I think he feels confident in Ohio. And then it becomes a contest of, can you win one or several of Nevada as a smaller state, but then Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota? Can the president get one of those states? And it may well be that if he has a good night and retains essentially the South up into Virginia and Arizona and Ohio, then maybe it's a clean sweep in those states. We just don't know. But I really think it's on a knife's edge. You could have a split of those Rust Belt states, or it could fall all one direction. I think ultimately it's a question of turnout and intensity, and the Trump campaign has it, and the question is, will it be enough?
Yeah. I want to show one more video of ballots, questionable conduct, and you're right, I've seen reports of heavily Republican precincts in Nevada and Georgia have technical problems. Isn't that lucky? I think we got one more clip from Pennsylvania. Take a look at this.
They don't know. So when you go in, and you know, I'm not trying to be ignorant, but no, we don't know you. So you go in and you give them direction, and they feel they're supposed to follow it.
Ma'am.
That's not happening. Not going to happen. No.
Giving them direction. It's the election.
No.
She put the PA down and
she's outside. She's not staying inside.
Conform to your ideology about this situation. But I just believe the conversation is over with.
It's a senior citizen building, and we're really, really concerned. For real. So for me, for just understanding that, take the voting stuff out of it. She can go in.
You know, there's so many clips. I'm not even going to play more of them. That's not even the one I had in mind. There's so many little instances like this, and I don't know if that's 10 votes in question or 100 or, God forbid, 1,000. We'll see how the night goes. Ben, thanks for joining us. We're going to talk to you at least once an hour. I didn't properly introduce you. I really like your book, American Ingrate. It is the definitive investigative book into Ilhan Omar, just outstanding. But you have a wide and deep interest in American politics, including foreign policy. I think you're a scholar with the Claremont Institute. Am I right with that?
Yes, a fellow at the Claremont Institute as well. I appreciate that.
Give us a little bit of a bio. I didn't properly introduce you. I jumped right into talking about the night with you. Give us 1 minute for folks who haven't seen your interviews on my show before.
I appreciate that again. I'm a columnist at Newsweek, which may surprise some given my political orientation, a senior contributor at The Federalist, and a fellow at the Claremont Institute as well. To your point, I published American Ingrate this year, the book about Ilhan Omar as the personification of the progressive Islamist nexus that I believe is dominating in the Democrat Party. And I think we've seen it in this election. We see it in the Biden-Sanders unity agenda and the like. And to your point, I have a focus on national security and foreign policy, but the problem, the challenge that we face today, and the challenge has always been to America, not the external problems, the problems from without, but our strength from within. And what I fear in this election, if it does not go the way that I hope it goes, and I suspect many of your viewers hope it goes as well, is that we will find ourselves in a place where we are back to an agenda of appeasement, submission, political correctness trumping all else, a lack of law and order, the rule of law, justice, and of course, the free enterprise system that underpins much of our strength as a nation and really the strength of Western civilization. So I really do believe this is a civilizational kind of election, and I hope voters took that to heart today. I think with the intensity we've seen on the Trump side, perhaps they did. We'll just have to see as the night plays out. Well, it's great to have you with us tonight. I'll let you go now. I think we have a cover of your book. I just want to put it on the screen to show our we don't have it yet. We'll bring it back up next time we see you. The book is called American Ingrate. And why do I talk about that book so much? First of all, I can't get over the title. It perfectly summarizes folks like Ilhan Omar who come and take all of America's blessings and then do nothing but disparage it and undermine it. But more importantly, because I think it describes, Ben, if I may, I think it describes the part of the Democratic Party that has the energy, the momentum, the youth, that is pushing. I mean, Joe Biden looks like a 90-year-old. He's 78, I think, or 70. I forget his age, 75 or something. He looks like he's 90. There it is, American Ingrate. Ilhan Omar and the progressive Islamist takeover
of the Democratic Party. She may be young and she may be rough, but she and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and the others in the squad are the ones driving Joe Biden's policy. I truly believe that. So Ben, congratulations on that book. We'll check in with you in about 45 minutes or so and come back and work your trap lines, Ben. Check your Twitter sources, check people. When we talk to you again, let us know if there's any interesting things you're observing out there.
Yeah, look forward to it.
Good to see you. There's Ben Weingarten of Newsweek magazine, which is outstanding to have a voice like his. Lynn, what's your mood so far?
Well, first of all, one thing I noticed, you were just talking about Florida and Georgia as well. The New York Times estimates have both of those states. In the case of Florida, over 90% forecasted win for the president. And in Georgia, at last check, over 60%. So that would obviously be pretty bullish for the president. You know, the way that I usually try to analyze these elections, and oftentimes the analysis isn't there to do it particularly well, but is what are the kind of pivot counties that might tell us something, serve as proxies for other states, other battleground areas. And in Miami-Dade County, for example, it appears the president has done very well, particularly, and that's a county which is dominated in part by Latino voters. So certainly there could be a trend there. Now, obviously, Florida has its own phenomenon in terms of the makeup of that Latino voter demographic and an anti-socialist bent to that demographic as well. So we'll see how that applies going forward in other states. I also took a look at some other interesting counties as well. There were some reports earlier about Cuyahoga County in Ohio, which is dominated by Cleveland, for example, where turnout's was down significantly in the county in general, and in Cleveland in particular. Now, those numbers have trickled up over time, but it doesn't appear necessarily that they're even going to hit 2016 percentages. So that's something to keep an eye on, because that's a county which was Hillary Clinton at around 2/3 of the vote last time, obviously crucial for Joe Biden's hopes there. Also, rural Nevada, all the numbers that we've seen coming out in the relevant counties appear to be coming out very strong for the president. Nevada, of course, was a loss last time, and Democrat turnout appears to be underperforming in that state. So also something to look at. Pinellas County in Florida, Republicans are up there. This is a county that President Obama won in 2008 and 2012. The president won it in 2016 as well, and usually serves as a bellwether. And I say the president up in terms of Republican ID voters turnout, which we assume president will dominate there. Lastly, Dauphin County, Pennsylvania. Trump lost there by 4,000 votes in 2016. It looks like Republican precincts are at least matching their turnout from last time, and Democrat precincts in that county are down. So that would obviously be significant if a county last time that went for Hillary Clinton actually flipped to President Trump this time. So those are some of the bullish signals that I'm seeing, and we'll have to see as more results roll in what it says about this head-to-head contest.
You know, that's very exciting, and I'm looking at those Miami numbers, and it's 54% to Biden, 45% to Trump in Miami-Dade, and that is remarkably close for what is such a blue county. I mean, I don't know the stats from last election in front of me, but I got to imagine they were, you know, Trump wasn't within, 45% in Miami for Trump. That's that Cuban vote, isn't it?
Yeah, it absolutely is. And, there's data out there showing that as Cubans get further removed generationally from living under the tyrannical Castro regime, that they tend to start going more blue. And the Cuban population in America, of course, has traditionally been a Republican, a staunch Republican constituency. I think it's very telling if you have second and even third generation Cubans in America, Cuban Americans, who are starting to go back towards the Republicans. It's an indicator of fear of, again, a socialist-dominated Democrat Party. And I think it's a fear with great reason. So absolutely worth keeping an eye on. I would also point out Jeff Rowe, who was the campaign manager for Ted Cruz in 2016, has pointed out a couple districts that we ought to keep an eye on tonight. And those are Missouri 2 and Oklahoma 5. One of these seats is a Republican seat. The other is a Democrat seat. They're heavily suburban. They're in districts that have traditionally had a Republican tilt. if there is a suburban bloodbath for the president and that ends up trumping gains in terms of turnout in rural areas, in terms of winning a greater percentage of votes among Black Americans as well as Latino Americans, those may be sort of telltale congressional districts in terms of looking at places that are sort of on a knife's edge. And we'll see if the suburban vote is really something that does the president in. So we've talked about some of the bullish signals. Those are some of the signals to look at from a more conservative perspective.
Yeah, well, and that is terrifying. I mean, I'm pleased that Florida, which was such a battleground in 2000, I mean, that was where it all came down to, and was pretty close last time. It looks like Trump's got that. And I think it's, even though numerically right now he's not ahead, judging by how he's moved up in some of those deep blue counties, I think it's safe to say he's likely going to win them. We'll check in with you again, maybe in 45 minutes or so. Keep us posted on those bellwether districts that you mentioned, counties. You've told us some of the hopeful signs, and we do need to know the pessimistic signs. But right now, would you say that Trump is overperforming what the pundits had said?
Yeah, I absolutely think that he is outperforming what the poll has said. And the question really is, and I think if you look at this from a macro perspective here, you have to adjust these polls for non-representative samples, for the fact that some pollsters have a vested interest in, I believe, trying to demoralize the Republican vote, adjusting for the shy Trump voter, let's say that's somewhere between 2 and 4%. So the question really is, where does that all shake out? Is that enough to cover the margins that we saw in many of these battlegrounds? And when you looked at the real clear average of battleground states this time versus last time, it's pretty close. It's still, another point or two in Biden's direction, a margin relative to Hillary Clinton. So we'll have to see as the night plays out. But these bellwether counties are certainly quite telling. And, we'll see where we go with Georgia and North Carolina and the like. And if the president is able to hold those, then it really does come down to these Rust Belt states, I think. And it'll be a fascinating finish to this evening. And we'll see if it's a finish to the race or if the race really picks up over the next 3 weeks or more. Since you were just talking about Minnesota, interestingly, Keith Ellison, the Attorney General, tweeted out something earlier today around, I believe, 5 o'clock Eastern time, saying, we need more votes. We need you to come out. We need your votes, something to that effect. Now, an attorney general should not be saying that we need votes, in particular, of course, for his party. And what happens if it turns out in Minnesota that it is a dead heat of a race and law enforcement or the election officials are forced to come up to some rulings and the like? I mean, you can see the corrosive nature of an attorney general voicing his opinion. By the way, same thing in Pennsylvania. The Secretary of State there tweeted out infamously that if all the votes are counted, Democrats will win in Pennsylvania. And he also tweeted out today that if there were any issues at the polls, that people should reach out to the Pennsylvania Dem voter assistance line. Yeah. So I think it's a good representation of where the Democrats are, and the left loves to talk about an independent, impartial justice system, and then look at how their attorney generals and secretaries of state act. As for what we're seeing out there, I think Florida and Georgia going the president's way obviously bodes well. He needs to retain these southern states. North Carolina, New York Times forecast was showing it at about 67% Biden as of about a half hour ago, and at last check, it was actually at 56% Trump. Now, this is with, I believe, less than 1%. It's a forecast number, so this is hypothetical. What they saw that made them change their minds, I think, is interesting. And we have to be patient because all of the early numbers across all of these states are the early voters. And that obviously trended significantly Democrat in most places. And then, of course, on Election Day, Republicans substantially outperform Democrats everywhere. So we have to take the early numbers with a grain of salt. But I think it is interesting that North Carolina shifted, at least in the New York Times forecast. Lastly, with respect to Ohio, it seems a bit as the turnout in the big cities there, and maybe this is a trend that we'll see across the country, was down in those cities. And then you had President Trump, it seems like, picking up a slightly higher margin than last time. And there have been a lot of reports out there showing that, as a general matter, the votes of Black Americans come in at lower rates than last time, and Donald Trump is taking a bigger proportion of those votes. Now, the other side of the equation, the other part of the coin is it appears that in the suburbs, Joe Biden might be outperforming Hillary Clinton relative to last time. And if that holds, that offsets what we're seeing in the more urban area. So, again, as I mentioned before, the question of the suburbs, which in many ways had already been trending sort of liberal, elite, progressive in terms of their culture, we're seeing that in the votes as well. On the other hand, the trade-off has been that Republicans are winning blue-collar, middle American voters under President Trump. And will that be a permanent realignment? We shall see. That cultural divide even matters, it feels like, more than the ideological divide at this point.
Yeah, you're right. We interviewed a professor from George Mason University, Frank Buckley, who wrote a book called The Republican Workers' Party. And at first, that's such a strange phrase. You don't see Republican Workers' Party like that's just opposite. But no, I think it's crystal clear that people who work in factories, people with hard hats, people who work outdoors, people who extract things from the ground, chop trees, mine mines, that used to be, a lot of those are union jobs, some are not union jobs. That used to be the heartland for any Dem, but those people have gone to Trump. And part of it's because of his infrastructure plans, part of it is because of his reshoring of factories, fighting China with tariffs. And I think it's also a cultural thing. So it's not just money issues. It's not calling voters chumps, which Biden did, not calling voters deplorable. Trump had a few rappers endorse him, and it was very funny because some of them are very, very different than your average Republican. Lil Pump, the rapper who was there in Miami, he's very funny. He's a Republican aesthetically. But the party of the celebrities, the party of Lady Gaga, is not the same party as a steel worker in Indiana.
Yeah, the Democrats have become the party of it's and then what they've tried to create in a dependent class in America. And the Republicans have really become the party, or at least a Donald Trump-led Republican Party. I do think that his gains are going to echo for years to come, and I do think it is going to transform what conservatism means and what the Republican Party stands for. At least it should, otherwise the party won't exist for very long. He has converted it into a party of union workers, the police, military veterans, those who are common sense, patriotic Americans who've been forgotten and left behind by the political. And have to credit, Carlson had a monologue about this the other night, and he basically said that Donald Trump is a big middle finger to the political elite, the political establishment. And so the love of Trump in some ways is proportional to the hatred of an establishment that has forgotten about these forgotten Americans who helped build the country, fight American war, and were our labor force in heavy industry for decades. And I think it's a positive shift in the Republican Party. And we'll see if the Democrats can hold that coalition together for long. Is that really going to be a winning strategy long term?
Ben, thank you for that. I want to throw one more thing at you. You mentioned earlier that the New York Times has such large resources, so many reporters, and although their editorial line and their biases are so pronounced, the one thing, because they have such resources, they can do the kind of calculations county by county, voter turnout. So when it's no commentary, just like sports scores, there's no commentary. You either scored the goal or you didn't. And I think tonight is that kind of night. All the bluster and BS is done. It's just what's it looking like in Miami-Dade. And so the facts are the facts. Trump's going to win on that basis. You mentioned earlier, one of the things they do is based on those sort of entrails, reading the entrails, they give a day of prediction. Now, yesterday, if the New York Times said Trump has a 10% chance of winning, I'd say that's BS, that's predictive, that's polls. But today, if they say Trump has a 10% chance of winning this county, I know it's based on voter turnout and trends. So I actually give some credence to it today because it's not guesswork, it's based on these factors we've been talking about. When you and I last spoke, the New York Times was saying that Joe Biden was quite likely to win North Carolina. Or is that about 2 hours ago that happened? Right now, the New York Times is saying that Donald Trump has a 71% chance, I don't know how they give it that precision, of winning North Carolina. So over the course of the last 2 hours, that state looks increasingly red, and I should tell you that 2/3 of the votes are in. That gives me a flicker of hope, Ben, a flicker of hope. What do you think?
Yeah, look, it makes the path seem much more realistic in terms of retaining those core states that the president had last time and just needing to win one or two of these Rust Belt states. Now, again, of course, it may well be that given how similarly some of these states are comprised of voters in terms of the demographics and the ideological inclination, that if you're going to win, let's say, a Pennsylvania, then all of the states are going to fall, and you're going to win Michigan and Wisconsin, and you're going to come really close in Minnesota like last time. But retaining these states in the South, I think, is critical for the president to have a chance against what the odds showed themselves to be. And again, my running theme is you don't want this to come down and hinge on just in Pennsylvania, because again, the litigation and voter fraud margin is just too strong there, and we'll be counting votes for days of these absentee ballots that maybe weren't even sent in at the proper time, where you can't verify the signature, but because of terrible court rulings at the state level and then at the federal level, these ballots will be counted, and they'll keep counting them until you have a Joe Biden victory. So yeah, again, we have to look at these states like in North Carolina. That was a bubble sort of state. Democrats harbored these hopes of winning in Georgia. Plenty of pollsters had Biden winning in Florida. We'll see where Arizona shakes out as well. And Texas had been talked about as well. And I saw a statistic before we came on showing that in Harris County, which I believe has Houston and several other more Democratic-leaning cities and suburban areas, that the votes are not there for Biden to win Texas. Obviously, if Texas fell, it would be a catastrophe for the Republican Party. The fact that all of these states that the Democrats harbored hopes of winning are all falling obviously bodes pretty well for the president. Let's see where we are in another hour or so when it comes to Ohio and Pennsylvania as more results trickle in. And again, as we get past the early vote count, which is going to make it look like a Dem victory in many of these states.
Ben, it's great to talk with you. You have such breadth and depth. I mean, my point of view is, Ben, I'm guessing you'd be following this as closely, even if you weren't coming on our show. What else is a political aficionado going to do on the most exciting night of the quadrennial? Am I right?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And in the social media age, it just gets amplified infinitely. So yeah, it's riveting political theater, but really, as I've said before, this is an existential race, and I think we're seeing some pretty fascinating signals out there in all of the electoral noise. One of the things that I'd point out just right off the bat, the New York Times had some statistics on this. If you look at Florida, North Carolina, and Georgia, Trump was +3 versus 2016 in majority black areas, +6 versus 2016 in urban areas, +11 in majority Hispanic areas, and +11 in Cuban predominant areas. So those are telling signs. And since we talked about Miami-Dade before, also worth noting, it looks like 2 House seats are going to flip there from D to R. So that's significant.
Now, that's very exciting. It's proof that Trump can make inroads, contrary to the horrendous fire hose of racism accusations. It's very encouraging to me that there are Hispanics, Latinos, African Americans, and other communities that can see through the barrage of lies. But I have seen polling reports, and I don't know what you have to say about this, that although Trump has made inroads with black and Latino communities, he has lost ground with white voters. And of course, America is still a majority white country. And you can be up, I think you said 11%, if I heard you right, in the Latino areas. That's a pretty cool number, but I think only 15% of Americans are Latino. If you got 60, 70%, whatever it is, white, moving up 11% in the Latino vote, so you've gained yourself 1 point in the election. You lose 3 points from the white community, you're wiped out. What's it looking like among white voters?
Yeah, so I think the really telling thing here is you have to ask which white voters. And you're seeing, again, the turnout in rural areas across the country thus far In particular, for example, small town Indiana, there were some tweets from Jason Miller of the Trump campaign talking about how those small towns that the campaign is looking at have high swing capture rates. That is, these small areas, rural areas in a place like Indiana, generally foretell big performance across rural places, across the Midwest, and that includes small Republican towns and small Democrat or purple towns as well. Trump is outperforming in Indiana in those small towns versus 2016, according to the campaign. And the campaign claims this correlates with Wisconsin, Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania. The other side of the coin, to your point, is the wealthy elite suburbs, generally speaking, seem to be trending stronger for Biden than they were for Hillary Clinton. Now, one caveat to that, Loudoun County, Virginia, 98 out of 99 precincts reporting had Donald Trump up, which would be a massive earthquake of a shift. These are sort of your D.C. suburb, Northern Virginia towns, which have gone strongly blue. That said, I believe the absentee ballots are missing, so I expect that margin to compress substantially and ultimately for the Democrats to take Virginia. But that said, Virginia was called immediately at the beginning of the night. And at least in terms of election day turnout, it seems Trump did exceptionally there. So something to keep an eye on as well. In terms of just the mixed bag of data that we're looking at, I've also seen some numbers out there showing that President Trump is underperforming Tom Tillis in North Carolina, as well as John James in Michigan. If he's underperforming John James in Michigan, that's a red flag, certainly, in terms of taking that state. John James is an underdog there, but looked to be performing more closely against the Democrat senator there than Donald Trump was running against Biden. So if he's underperforming James, and James was an underdog to begin with, that makes it increasingly difficult to imagine the president will win Michigan, but we'll see as we have some more results in.
You know, we talked about Cubans for a second. I just want to mention that Miami, when I last checked, it was Joe Biden 53%, Donald Trump 46% in Miami. That is incredible to me. It shows the wisdom of Trump making that, I think on the day before, I think 2 days ago, he was in Miami for a late night rally. I mean, I don't know if he needed that late night rally, but he knew that he had strength in Miami-Dade, and that's what put him over the top. That's amazing. I mean, to me, that town, I mean, it's a wonderful city, and every Canadian loves Miami, especially people in Eastern Canada. That's where they go down to get out of the cold winter. But when I think of, Jews, Cubans, people from the Caribbean, I think of people who are not Republican base. And the fact that, Trump's at 46% there is amazing. I hope that's not the only thing I say is amazing tonight. But all he needs is a few more miracles like that, and he's got this thing.
Yeah, well, and you see in Ohio that the early vote seemed to favor Joe Biden, as one would expect, but those margins have come in substantially now, and it seems like, and if 2016 have passed as prologue on this, the Trump campaign reportedly is pretty confident in Ohio. It seems like those numbers the trend lines ultimately cross. And if the president prevails there, then we really are looking at, okay, what happens in Arizona and then what happens in these other Rust Belt states? And that's the whole election really right there. So it'll be fascinating to see. And hopefully we have some clarity tonight, but I wouldn't necessarily bet on it.
Is it too early to talk about any Senate changes? For our Canadian viewers who are not familiar with the American system, correct me if I'm wrong, Ben, but because senators serve 6-year terms and they're generally staggered, approximately 1/3 of the Senate is up for grabs every 2 years, whereas every congressional seat is up for grabs. Correct me if I'm wrong on that. I think that's a fairly basic fact. Are there any interesting Senate races? I mean, or were they all in safe seats? I mean, the Senate has a very low turnover rate. Any news on that front?
Yeah, I think there are a couple big things to note here. First of all, John Hickenlooper in Colorado was declared the winner over Cory Gardner, the Republican incumbent. So that's obviously a huge blow to Republican efforts to retain the Senate. On the other hand, Doug Jones, the Democrat in Alabama, who was able to get into that seat, under fortuitous circumstances, let's put it that way, looks like he will probably lose to Tommy Tuberville, who's a college football coach down in Alabama. So the net of that is 0. We may not know what is going to happen in terms of the makeup of the U.S. Senate until several months down the road, because in Georgia, the way their system works at a state level, you need to win 50% plus one of the vote to prevail. And in one of the races, Kelly Loeffler, the incumbent who was appointed by the governor there to hold a Senate seat, is up against a Republican member of the House, Doug Collins, as well as a Democrat. And the two Republicans are almost certainly going to split the vote. And so then there will ultimately be a runoff election there. So we may not know. And the other contest there with the incumbent Republican senator is quite close as well. So we may not know what the makeup of the Senate will be for some time, but we'll see how these other races play out. I mentioned the John James race against the incumbent Gary Peters in Michigan. The Democrat is an interesting race, and we'll see how close it is. And if John James prevails in that race, then I think you are looking at maybe not a red wave, but certainly an earthquake. We'll see how it plays out over the evening. But I think we have to watch what happens in Georgia. And we have to watch, again, also to see if Alabama flips and that nets out against that Colorado seat. And in the Arizona seat, of course, is a critical one with Martha Valley running against Kelly. And that'll be a huge race. And Arizona, of course, itself is something that the entire election may hinge on, the presidential election, the Senate as well. So we need to keep an eye on Arizona for sure.
You know, the Yiddish word for pins and needles is spilkus. I'm on spilkus. I did not think I would at least have this much hope. You know, I was a little bit depressed 2 days ago because folks were saying, look at the polls, look at the polls. And I know better than to look at the polls. But I also know that pollsters, even if they're liberal, try to be accurate for reasons of reputation alone. And I know that there was some reflection by Nate Silver, and I use him, he's a famous pollster and statistician and actuarialist. After 2016, I saw some reflections and how do we get it wrong. And so while I do believe that a lot of polling is done for disinformation or narrative reasons, oh, Biden's so far ahead, give up hope, Republicans, I also do believe that there are some pollsters who genuinely try and nail it. So when there were so many polls that were depressing, you know, you just, at a certain point, you can't dismiss them all. But maybe the enthusiastic turnout is part of it, because if you're not taking that into account in your model. Anyway, I'm optimistic now. Are you optimistic, Ben? Give me that.
I'm cautiously optimistic.
That's the best way to live. Ben Weingarten, author of American Ingrate, fellow at the Claremont Institute, columnist at Newsweek. We'll let you go now, but we're planning on being here for the duration. And if you're like me, I was telling the story the other day about how I was up till 3 a.m. with the missus because we didn't want to go to bed till we knew for a fact in 2016 that Trump was going to win. So if you're going to be up anyways to the wee hours, why don't you join us and give us your thoughts? It's a little early to ask you to stay up to 3 a.m. Because we don't know if we'll need to stay up that late. But I intend to stay here as late as necessary.
Well, I appreciate that. And last time, in 2016, I left the United States at around 1 in the morning, heading first to Hong Kong by way of China. So I knew during that night, based upon the reactions of many of the Europeans in the terminal before we flew out, and then when I got on the ground in China, you knew that it was an earthquake, and it was a crushing victory for President Trump. And I hope to see the same kind of reactions, especially from our Chinese foes tomorrow morning as well.
Well, isn't that something? I can imagine I mean, I don't know if there was internet in those days on transcontinental flights, but not knowing for such a long flight, not knowing for sure, I mean, and then landing to the news must have been incredible. It would be like being on a ship in ancient times and just not knowing what was going on. That's a great story. I will let you go, but I will tell my story, which I've told to the staff here before about, well, maybe I don't want to trap you. I'm going to tell a story. I won't do it right now because I got to bring in David Menzies here. But I have a fun story for my night. I'll tell it now. So I told you I was staying up late with the missus, watching till 3 a.m. And I'm not going to get personal, but the missus is not very political. It's not very political. But everyone in the world knew this was a momentous night. And I hope I'm not going to get in trouble for telling this story on the telly. So we're watching, and the kids are very young, and they know something's up because mom and dad are staying up late and talking and looking at the internets. And the kids are coming down the stairs, and they're going back upstairs, and they're coming down the stairs, and they're going back upstairs. What's going on? What's going on? What are you talking about, mom and dad? What's going on? What's going on? And I shouldn't tell the story, but I don't think there's a big problem telling it. And so when it becomes, and it's tense. You know, it's tense. Florida. It came out of Florida in a lot of ways, right? And there's a tension there because so much turns on it. And then when it was finally clear, and I don't know what time this was, 1, 2, 3 a.m., and the tension breaks, and you realize that Trump actually overcame everything. So it's not just the tension of the night, Ben. It's the tension of the previous 6 months, previous 18 months. And my missus cries a little bit. I shouldn't say that, but it's not a bad cry. It's a stress relief. It's an, oh my God, it's of relief, right? And one of the little ones saw this, and she's not used to mom crying. So, okay, but it's just relief and jubilation. And so the next day, all the kids go to school. And obviously, like all schools, it's a socialist, left-wing, anti-Trump school. So the kids go to school, and then the kids come back. And they're talking about the most momentous night. And we're in Toronto, Canada, but everyone here is obsessed with Trump. And here's the story, Ben. So our middle kid says, we were all talking about the election last night, and none of the kids really knew what was going on. And all the kids were saying their parents were crying. And I said, my mom was crying too. The only kid in the class whose mom was crying tears of joy and relief, but she felt solidarity with all the other kids whose parents were crying tears of pain and Canadian anti-Americanism. And I don't know, I find that story endlessly amusing. Maybe it's not a knee slapper, but it's the emotions of love and hate and tension and relief and so much riding on it. And every parent at the school was crying for the loss of Hillary Clinton. But we were crying tears of joy, Ben. That's not a great story now that I tell it again, but I think about that from time to time, Ben, and I feel a little bit of that tension right now too. I don't know if I'm going to be crying tears of joy or tears of pain, but it feels like that kind of night. I don't know.
Absolutely. This is the culmination of months of an attempt to destroy a president who's truly representative of the American people, the broad middle of America. And this would be another chance to put down this rolling perpetual coup attempt is the way I see it. And I must admit, last time around, I was more happy to see some form of justice brought to Hillary Clinton than I was that it was Donald Trump that was the victor. But this time, not only do I want to see the left destroyed on this election night, but Donald Trump has been an exceptional president that outperformed all of the expectations, even the best expectations of his supporters. And it's just such a pivotal thing if he were to take this again and to have 4 more years to actually have a presidency as opposed to the first 4, which were hampered so much, and yet he still accomplished so much. So obviously, I very much hope this is a resounding victory, and hopefully we'll know before the night's out. We shall see.
Have you found out any interesting nuggets that you want to share with our viewers?
Sure. Well, let's start with what the markets are telling us right now. And let's start with betting markets. American sports books have overwhelmingly swung to forecasting a Trump victory tonight. And I've seen.
Give me an example. I was looking at Ladbrokes, the British betting house, but I couldn't find their latest stats. Can you tell me an American? I just don't know bookies. Tell me a place to look it up. I want to see it with my own eyes.
Yeah, I don't know bookies outside of this context, to be clear, but Bovada, for example, had swung to up to 86% favorite for Trump. Some other sports books as well have been at around 65 to 70%. But I think an even more telling sign potentially is that the Chinese yuan has absolutely tanked.
Come on.
And at the same time, the NASDAQ has been surging in futures. So obviously,
that's people betting with their money. That's not people talking tough to score points in Washington. When you're trading currency, when you're doing deals like that, that's real stuff. That's skin in the game. Those people think Trump's going to win.
Yeah, the Chinese yuan would probably be surging if Joe Biden was going to romp in a landslide tonight. So I think those are very, very telling signals that we can point to. And as you said, where people really have skin in the game, they're voting with their wallets. So beyond that, I've seen a lot of evidence of various counties that are sort of bellwethers, whether in Wisconsin or Michigan. And I should preface by saying this is sort of the reverse in these states. In many of these states, in-person votes come in first, and then subsequently we get the absentee, the mail-in ballots, and the like. So we need to have that caveat. But in many of these counties that are sort of bellwether counties in the Rust Belt states, President Trump is running either competitively or ahead. And in Pennsylvania in particular, we see him, for example, running between 48 and 51% in Bucks County, where he lost by about a point to Hillary Clinton there. And that's a big suburban, wealthier area, or many wealthier towns there. So that's obviously pretty bullish for him. But in particular, in those sort of more rural counties, and if you look in Pennsylvania, basically on the coasts of the state, the extreme west, looks like President Trump is running very competitively. And again, same thing in Michigan and Wisconsin. And really, as I mentioned earlier, you know, for President Trump to be confident in a victory, I think he needs to win without Pennsylvania because, as I said, I think the vote fraud margin and litigation margin there is significant. And we've already heard announced tonight that Philadelphia will not be releasing tens of thousands, I think a couple 100,000, will not be counting a couple 100,000 of the votes that came in tonight until tomorrow or a little bit later this week. And that's why I've stressed the president really needs to win some of the other Rust Belt states and maintain the rest of the map that he had taken the other time to comfortably win. Because if it comes down to a situation where everything hinges on Pennsylvania, I give advantage to Democrats in that kind of knockdown, drag out political fistfight. So I don't want to get ahead of ourselves here, but I do think there are some very bullish signs coming out about the markets and then as well in these Rust Belt pivot counties. And as we get more results in, we'll see if the trends continue to hold.
You know, that's very interesting. I want to, you remind me of the different counties. And I had never been to Pennsylvania in my life until about 5 years ago. And I wrote a book about fracking called Groundswell. I was interested in fracking. I knew that Pennsylvania is really where fracking took off. I mean, it's big in Texas, big in North Dakota, but Pennsylvania was really where it was perfected, the Marcellus Shale. And there's a county on the west side called Washington County. And I'm going from memory here, but I've studied this place so much, I think my memory's fairly accurate. In the year 2000, it was split, Democrat, Republican. In 2004, 2008, 2012, it was slowly creeping Republican. And by the time 2016 came along, I think it was a 30-point margin for the Republicans. Why? Like from a Democrat riding to, we call it ridings up here, county to massively Republican. I'm just on that right now. 98% of the votes are counted in Washington County. And Trump has a 24-point lead. He has a 26,000 vote lead in Washington County. So that county, which used to be Democrat, now gave him 26,000 votes towards flipping the rest of the state. And by the way, I think Trump only won Pennsylvania by what, 60,000 votes or something last time. Why? Because that's the place that all the activists on the left, that the Lady Gagas of the world said, ban fracking. Yoko Ono said, ban fracking. And Kamala Harris, ban fracking. And they say, no, 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 no. This has saved us. Coal is gone. Steel is gone. These are our jobs. So that's the place that I think if they're going to win, that's got to offset the fraud in Philly. I'm very excited about, because Washington County is this amazing place that has this boom because of fracking. Don't mind me. I don't know a lot of counties in the United States, Ben, but I know Washington County. And it's just working class, blue collar people, small businesses, landowners who have just said, don't kill my job. And that's a repudiation of the AOCs and the Green New Deals. That's the real life. That's flyover country. And when Trump was so brilliant, he said, he was asked about getting out of the Paris Accords for global warming. He said, I represent Pittsburgh, not Paris. He wasn't just going for the alliteration or the assonance, whatever the word is, P and P, Pittsburgh, Paris. Pittsburgh is the big city near the fracking. Now, Pittsburgh itself, overwhelmingly Democrat. But when he said Pittsburgh versus Paris, I was talking about, okay, thanks for letting me go on a little tangent there about Washington County. But it's places like that that are going to do it for Trump if he takes Pennsylvania.
Absolutely right, and across the Midwest, I would say.
Yeah. Well, tell me something that's very interesting. Now, last time we had you on, you were saying that there were one or two Senate seats that moved around, that the Democrats grabbed one in Colorado, but they gave up one in Alabama, if I'm remembering what you said right. Is there anything interesting on the Senate side or the House side, or is it, I mean, obviously the Democrats are going to hold the Congress, hold the House of Representatives, I take it. Any feeling on the Senate, or is it just too early to tell?
It looks like Tom Tillis is going to prevail in North Carolina, and to the extent that happens, if everything else kind of proceeds as it looks like it is, and for example in Arizona, it looks like the Republican may lose that seat, the overwhelming odds are that Republicans will retain the Senate, even with the net loss there. So that would obviously be hugely significant. And you know, we could have a situation where actually the makeup of two branches is the same, the way that things are kind of trending right now. And I don't want to be, I don't want to get ahead of ourselves here, but it very much looks like the Senate's going to remain Republican majority and the House is going to remain Democrat majority. And you can already Democrat pundits on television. Donna Brazile, I was amazed on Fox, a Democrat operative, longtime Democrat operative, about 45 minutes ago was saying Joe Biden still has a path to win. Now, originally she was saying there were about 7 Joe Biden paths to win. And so I think watch the rhetoric, and it's a tell for what Democrats are feeling about tonight. It's clear that it's not a blue wave, that it's not a landslide on the Democrat side, self-evident. I also seen there was commentary where one Democrat was saying what we're seeing tonight is the result of Republican voter suppression and essentially racism and bigotry. Again, if those are the narratives that are coming out of the left right now, then I'd be very scared if I'm a Joe Biden supporter. But we'll have to see. I really do believe that it comes down to the extent Democrats are going to win Arizona, and they are ahead very high with a substantial percentage of the votes being reported, then this really is all going to hinge again on the Rust Belt. And as I've said the entire time from the start of the evening, and as I've held for a while, if President Trump wants to win, he really needs to do it, I believe, without Pennsylvania, because it's just too much of a toss-up once we get into counting votes and finding votes behind dumpsters and litigation and God knows what else. Yeah. That's not a place where Republicans generally do well, even though if anyone could do it, this president could win a fight like that. But you don't want it to come to that. You really want to prevail in a Wisconsin and or a Michigan and or a Minnesota. And we'll see what happens in those states as the results continue to trickle in.
Let me just talk for 1 minute about the House of Representatives, or typically called congressmen. Are there any, I see there's I think you mentioned it, that in Florida there was a flip by, it looks like a Cuban-American, Carlos Jimenez, if I'm saying that right. I presume he's Cuban. That's part of the wave. He ousts as an incumbent. Are there any other interesting little flips like that that you are aware of? Or Do you think the numbers are going to move significantly on the Congress side? Is it too early to tell?
I think it's a little bit too early to tell. I mean, there are some seats, for example, there's a seat in North Carolina. Madison Cawthorn was a sort of an upstart Republican candidate, and it looks like he's going to win his seat. Close to my neck of the woods in kind of the one red district in the New York City area, which encompasses parts of Brooklyn and Staten Island, Max Rose, the incumbent member of the House, supposedly was in a dead heat with a Republican challenger, Nicole Malliotakis. I don't yet have results in on that, but definitely a race worth watching as well. That said, you're also going to see the number of members of the squad swell, I think. And it doesn't take that many members of the House for that squad to swell. But, for example, Jamal Bowman is a congressman or a future congressman after tonight, who primaried Elliot Engel, longtime member of the establishment from New York in the Democratic Party. Bowman defeated him, and I think that, again, sort of accentuates this trend of radical leftists continue to grow their numbers, continue to grow their power and influence. Even a member of the squad is not the next Speaker of the House after Nancy Pelosi. It's a real trend, the radicalization of members of the House, and I think you'll see more insane, asinine legislation and chicanery out of members of the House, in particular if there's a President Trump over the next 4 years.
Mm-hmm. I'm just looking at one source of information here. It looks like about 200 of the seats are declarable, and so far 2 have flipped to the Democrats and 2 have flipped to the Republicans. Now, of course, the more contested ones we have yet to hear from resolutely. But so far, it doesn't look like a massive wave. And if you were to have believed the polls, even a few days ago, you would have thought that the Republicans, I think, would have lost some ground in the House of Representatives. Is that fair, that Republicans are outperforming the polls on the congressional side, or have we just not seen those controversial battleground districts yet?
I think what we really may have seen is that the bloodletting that was going to happen with respect to the House happened in 2018. And I think the country really is as divided as is being played out from a partisan perspective. Tonight, it doesn't appear that anyone is either riding the president's coattails or being dragged down by the president. Everything really seems to be sort of sticking status quo at the end of the day, which is kind of a fascinating occurrence. And I think, again, there needs to be a reckoning after this with the media and the pollsters, because their projections, maybe psychological projection is played out, not their actual forecasts. And you're going to have to now, there will be a question as to whether, is this a Trump phenomenon that the polls are so wrong, or is this a biased leftist concentration in polling and in the media that's causing them to be so far off? But it's remarkable to see, and it's damning, quite frankly. It's a huge indictment of our political class.
Yeah, it certainly is. I think I'm so glad you started our segment the way you did by referring to non-political experts who have skin in the game. And what I mean by that is they're not looking to get a hit on CNN or MSNBC. They're not looking to curry favor with a political client or a political boss. If you're a foreign exchange trader selling and buying yuan, if you are in the stock market, you don't invest emotionally, or maybe you do, but if you do, you're out of money pretty quickly. That you tell me that stocks are surging, the yuan, the Chinese currency is falling, those are people who aren't virtue signaling. You virtue signal an investment, a fool and his money are soon parted. Completely different incentive structure for pollsters, for pundits, for people who crave getting a slot on a CNN, like a CNN contributor's gig. The groupthink that sets in, that's another thing, is the small political class self-reinforces. I don't know, very interesting. You've made me hopeful again. And I'm going to check out the betting site. What was that betting site you said right off the top?
So Bovada was the sports book.
All right, we'll have to look that up. I'm unfamiliar with them. Justin, if you can find that website, if you have it, can we throw it on the screen right now? The latest odds are Trump minus 250, Biden plus 185. I'm not fluent enough in odds making to understand how, I mean, normally I hear like, do you know what that means, Ben? Justin's taking some guesses with me. Neither of us are bettors, obviously. I don't know if that means Trump's going to win or Biden's going to win. I just don't know what it means. We'll have to Google it. We'll have to have someone who's an expert should tell us. Do you know what it means, Ben?
Certainly Trump favorite.
Okay. Well, if you're literally a Trump favorite, as in if you bet that Trump's going to win, and they say, well, yeah, everyone thinks so, that's allowing you to bet on Biden, and you will make a return on that. I don't know. That's incredible. That's incredible to me. So I don't even know the lingo for betting. But if you're saying that the odds makers are favoring Trump, again, that's people who are making real decisions with real outcomes, not just wishful thinking. Got me making some wishes, I tell you that. I'm looking at the map now. It being 11 Eastern Time, 8 Pacific Time, we're starting to see polls from the far west, Washington, Oregon, California. Obviously, they're Democrat. A question I have for you, and then we'll let you sign off and do some more poking around. And maybe you can come back and give us just a touch more explanationology on betting lingo, because I feel like I flubbed that there, Ben. But that's very interesting to me that people with skin in the game are saying Trump's going to win. One question I have is there going to be any stock taking by people in Portland, in Seattle, who say, you know what, we lived through the Chaz, you know, that semi-autonomous Antifa zone in Seattle. We've lived through the defund police extremism. We've lived through 3 months of nightly rioting in Portland, and the Democrats have made it all worse. We're voting for Trump because he might be a son of a bitch, but at least he's going to crack down on the riots. Do you think we're going to see any sort of reckoning by people who say, yeah, rioting's not cool, I'm not for the Dems anymore?
I think you may see some of it outside the cities, but do I think that there will be a change in composition in the city council as members of the House?
No, I don't say a single seat's going to switch hands. I'm just saying, do you think you might see 5-10% less enthusiasm for the Dems? Do you think you might see some protest? Oh, no. You're not going to flip any seats. But do you think you might see a marked decline in support for the Dems? Can a man daydream?
I think you could see protest votes not for them, but obviously not for the evil orange man either, or his party. And look, you've seen defections in the media, for example, of leftists, you know, the Matt Taibbis and Glenn Greenwalds, and we can tick off the list of names of prominent leftist writers who have said enough is enough. We're anti-woke. We are anti sort of political establishment progressive, even though we are genuinely, they're kind of purist leftist in some ways, but they are against this establishment. And then they're against the woke radicals out there who are completely illiberal. So is there a little bit of movement there among kind of the so-called intelligentsia or actual intelligentsia? Yes, there is, but they're small in number, and obviously you face big repercussions if you don't toe the party line, so to speak.
All right, very interesting, Ben. Thanks for joining us. I hope you can stay up a little later. It's only 11 p.m. and the party's just getting started. I am more optimistic now than I have been in days. And I don't know. I mean, can a fella dream? I remember our conversation a couple weeks ago, Ben. I think that so much of civilization and the values of the West versus the values of barbarians and chaos, I think it's at stake. And America has overcome grave setbacks before. I mean, the Civil War, an obvious one. The Revolutionary War, what a great risk that was. Barack Obama was a disaster, but America survived it. But this one just feels like it's a more significant fork in the road. You have you couldn't have two more opposite choices on the ballot. It feels so grave. And I think most conservatives would accept a defeat. They would grumble about it. They would point out the fraud and the chicanery, but they wouldn't riot. But I think slowly the freedoms would ebb away. I would rather have Democrats lose and riot in impotent rage. I think that's going to happen. I think we're going to see riots either way. Ben, how you doing? It's pretty late. It's after midnight, but it's getting exciting. Tell me what you've been reading, seeing, hearing in the hour since we've spoken to you last.
Yeah, so I think the biggest revelation, and I've only seen one reporter put this out so explicitly so far, and it was a Bloomberg reporter, is that officials from Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania have all indicated to different degrees that they won't have final vote counts out tonight, which to me is a disaster for the country. It invites all sorts of potential chicanery in the days ahead. And so I think that's a huge revelation. Now, I have not seen this corroborated by multiple reporters yet. We do know that in Philadelphia, for example, tens of thousands, multiple 100,000 votes are not going to be counted tonight, so that was a given. But the fact that we may not have final tallies in Wisconsin and Michigan is certainly an issue and certainly disturbing. Maybe not at all surprising in the way that this political season is and the way this entire year has gone, but certainly not a positive development. I don't think any American, no matter what your political stripe, should view this as a positive development unless you think it's going to help your side win ultimately. So that's one data point. And another data point, two kind of cross-cutting data points. One, the New York Times is now in their forecast meter. They've pushed Georgia, which was, I think at one point over 70 or 80% Trump, now to tilting Biden at 60% with around 80% of the votes in. So we'll have to keep an eye on that as the vote totals creep towards 100%. Obviously, if Georgia ended up flipping into the Biden column, that makes the Rust Belt imperative for the Trump campaign. It would mean, you'd pretty much have to sweep or at least win 2 out of 3 when it comes to Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin. On the other hand, and this is the cross-cutting point, Arizona is a state that, for example, Fox called very quickly, and not only Trump campaign officials, but also Arizona Republican officials have reacted furiously to this, saying, look, we're X 100,000 votes down. There's over 1 million votes to come, and they're from our counties, and we're projecting up to 2/3 vote in those counties, which would more than make up for the deficit Republicans currently. So you could foresee a situation potentially where Georgia moves into the loss column for the president and Arizona moves into the win column in spite of what was predicted. But it's all a little bit premature speculation. But those are some of the things that are turning this into a more chaotic night. And I think point to the fact that we're not going to know if the president is reelected or if there's a new president for some time, unfortunately.
Well, that is a disaster for the country. It makes me think back in my history to the 1960 election, where the Democrats cheated like crazy to get John F. Kennedy into the White House. Massive fraud, massive proof of fraud. But Nixon made the decision not to challenge it. He licked his wounds and he came back, and of course he was elected president a dozen years later. But he made the decision that for him to challenge that, to call into question American democracy and the rule of law, and to accuse the president-elect of fraud would be so damaging to America that he just would not do it, even though he knew, as everyone knew, that Joe Kennedy cheated the whole thing. How different the Democrats and well, back then it was a Democrat cheater who won and the Republican who declined to fight. Now the Democrats are cheating, and I mean, the governor of Michigan in particular has been a governor who has sparred with Trump, and of course they're going to refuse to allow a Trump victory tonight. That's the scandal here, but the media, they already know the game plan. The media is going to say any declaration of finality, let alone victory tonight, unless it's a Biden victory, they just won't allow. You can see this coming a mile away.
Yeah, they've telegraphed this in article after article. What happens if the president refuses to leave? And then there was a messaging out earlier from the Biden campaign today about, when the networks declare the Joe Biden the mathematical president-elect, then the president must stand down. They've been preparing for this for a long time, for chaos, for litigation, for information warfare, essentially, and propaganda. So they've telegraphed this for us. And so I guess to that end, I appreciate their transparency, but this is clearly not a good thing for the country. The one positive I will take away thus far is if you look at the voting as it stands in Michigan and Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, many of these districts that were the kind of Trump, Reagan Democrat, New Age Reagan Democrat district seem to be going even more strongly for Trump this time around. So that would imply that hopefully he could beat the litigation and or fraud margin in these states. But I think we're going to have to wait and see. Unfortunately, I mean, again, I'm going on the basis of one report from, by all accounts, seemingly a credible reporter. We know that it's the case in Pennsylvania that we're not going to have final vote counts today. But as for Wisconsin and Michigan, I guess the jury is still out. I haven't seen it widely reported, but it's certainly troubling, to say the least, to the extent these reports are accurate.
I want to show you a tweet from the New York Times a few hours ago. I think they deleted it. I'm showing you a screenshot. Justin, do you have that email and WhatsApp that I sent to you? I sent it to you by email and WhatsApp. Let me read it, so we'll put it up on the screen when we get it. There it is. This is the New York Times. This isn't reporting. This is a declaration. The New York Times said, the role of declaring the winner of a presidential election in the U.S. falls to the news media. The broadcast networks and cable news outlets have vowed to be prudent. Here's how it will work. Hang on. Now, Ben, you're a bit of an expert on matters like the U.S. Constitution. I haven't read it in a while, but when I last read it, I didn't see anything about the role of declaring the winner of the presidential election falling to the New York Times. I just sort of missed that part. But they have declared that, or admitted that, or confessed that. That's one of the most hubristic, condescending, arrogant things I've ever seen. And I think it's even funnier coming from a newspaper owned by Mexico's richest man, Carlos Slim. That's an incredible, incredible thing right there we just read.
And then they pulled the tweet down and tried to clarify it, but the cat's out of the bag. You revealed yourself to be these pompous and sanctimonious, arrogant. We can run through the adjectives to describe them, but it captures so perfectly that our media gatekeepers, our elites, think themselves to be so superior to everyone else that they have these roles that we've never given them. We've never granted them these sort of powers. And what has the media done in the last 40 years and the last 20 years to deserve any sort of role like that, of that kind of magnitude or importance? I mean, it's an absolute joke. This is a media that has put forth the Russiagate conspiracy for the last 4 years. This is Democrats saying, Democrats shall determine who the winner is and when we declare who that winner is. That's what this is really about. It's about power at the end of the day and gatekeeping. But I think, once again, the media and the pollsters have completely beclowned themselves during this entire election. And some people hold out hope that there's going to be a reckoning. I don't know. I mean, asinine business models can last a long time if, to your point, they're wealthy backers who are willing to see these things be loss leaders, essentially, and novelty items for them, or luxury goods for them. But the American people deserve better. The world deserves better, frankly. And it's just a joke. I mean, once again, the media is always the loser because they've dug their own grave.
Yeah. I'm just switching gears for a second here. It looks like on the Senate side, we mentioned the two flips. That looks like the Republicans have lost Colorado to the Democrats, and the Democrats have lost Alabama to the Republicans. Are there any races there we should keep our eyes on? Because in Michigan right now, John James appears to be leading, but there's so many votes from Wayne County, that's Detroit, that haven't come in. I think that's a misleading result. Would you agree with me there's really no chance of John James winning in Michigan?
I wouldn't say there's no chance, but it's very close. I mean, he has a big margin lead, but to your point, it's with substantial votes remaining in places that are going to be hostile to him. But that said, thus far in terms of vote count, the president, for example, is doing far better in Wayne County than he was in 2016. So that might give a glimmer of hope to John James. I won't say that it's a foregone conclusion, but certainly, obviously, Peters is the big favorite there. No question about that.
You know, there's, listen, there's 50 U.S. states. I'm not even an American. I live in Canada. There's only a limited number of things you can follow out of curiosity. But the case of Jon Ossoff in Georgia, that oleaginous Democrat, really an outsider in terms of his funding base. What a pleasure to see him going down to defeat there. Like the Democrats pouring money in from Hollywood to try and put Beto O'Rourke in Texas or Jon Ossoff in Georgia. They're getting too close for my comfort, but it looks like the red wall is holding solid there. Would you agree with me on that?
Yes, and it's the same thing with Lindsey Graham, where I think they poured $100 million in to try to take down Lindsey Graham. And, you know, for whatever faults the incumbent Republicans may have, these competitors would be disasters. So this is money well spent from the Democrats.
Cal Cunningham, the Democrat contender in North Carolina, had an infidelity scandal that had various layers to it. And to my surprise, he was actually challenged on it a bit by the media. I think it became an issue. I mean, you would think that a generation after Bill Clinton's absolute debasement of the office sexually, that matters like infidelity no longer count. I think it was the infidelity, but also the lies, the cover-up, the fact that there was a military spouse involved. I think, if I'm getting my facts straight, did that resonate, or is this just a red wave and we're talking North Carolina? Because it looks like the Republicans are going to hold that and beat Cal Cunningham again, who had so much money behind him.
Yeah, I don't think this is a function of the red wave. I think this really was sort of an October surprise sort of issue, and good on the voters for keeping Senator Tillis in office, because that also would have been a disastrous loss with we can't even begin to think through what the implications would be of a loss of that seat. So, you know, these states, like in North Carolina, for example, we don't want to see, if you're a conservative, you don't want to see North Carolina become a Virginia, but sometimes a state like in North Carolina is starting to look purple, just like in Arizona is starting to look more like a Colorado, and North Carolina is starting to look more like a Virginia. So it's very important to retain these seats and hopefully grow majorities in the years to come. And, you know, those are some of the bigger looming clouds in this realignment of, on the one hand, suburban elites becoming more leftist, and we'll see if that's a Trump-related phenomenon or if that's a broader trend. And then conversely, the middle American labor police veteran becoming a Republican voter. This is a realignment that we're seeing, and it'll be fascinating to see if in a decade or 2 decades you look at the Midwest as a Republican bastion, and then, you know, unfortunately, the South may be a mixed bag.
Yeah, very interesting. Well, listen, it's great to catch up with you. Now, it's 12:30 a.m., and I don't want to keep you up late, but I get the feeling that even if we said goodbye to you for the night, you'd probably be staying up to watch things anyways. Am I right on that?
At a minimum, following on my phone for as long as I can. But I do fear that we're not necessarily going to get any finality tonight. And it's demoralizing, but the fight goes on.
Yeah. All right. Well, listen, I'll have our producer-editor, Justin, stay in touch with you via email. And if you're going to call it a night, feel free to let him know. So we'll leave it open as to whether or not you want to join us again. We've sort of made the commitment to stay very late. I hear your point that very late here could mean days. And we're not going to stay here for days, but we'll stay here. We were talking about 3 a.m. Am I right on that, Justin? So we're committed to stay here to 3. And why don't you stay in touch with Justin if you're up for another round. We've really appreciated your smarts, Ben. You're one of the keenest observers, and not just with a shallow talking point, but with a deep knowledge. And I've really enjoyed our interviews on other subjects on the Ezra Levant Show. So it's great to have you with us on tonight's election night. So I'll say goodbye now. I hope you're still up in an hour. I get the feeling you're going to be, because this is like the Super Bowl for political folks. So hopefully we'll talk to you again. But if not, have a great night, and thanks so much for sharing your wisdom with us.
Well, I greatly appreciate the kind words, and thanks so much for giving me the opportunity.
Right on. Okay, take care, my friend. Well, there you have it. Ben Weingarten, columnist with Newsweek, a fellow at the Claremont Institute, and the author of American Ingrate, which is a deep biography on Ilhan Omar. That's an excerpt from my daily TV show that I do live at 12 noon Eastern Time. We talk about the news of the day, we play interesting viral videos, and most importantly, I take your questions that you chat to me through YouTube Super Chat. I think that's the funnest part of it. So tune in every weekday at 12 noon Eastern Time, only here at rebelnews.com.